Well, welcome to Lesson 8, Part 1. In Lesson 8, Part 1, we'll have a look at verbal stems, and in Part 2, we'll have a look at weak verbs. Now, the topic of verb stems and weak verbs covered in this lesson often fill over half of any Hebrew textbook. In order to begin reading the Hebrew Bible, you should know what these things are, but you don't need to get bogged down in the details. Just be able to recognize them. The suggested exercises for Lesson 8 in Biblical Hebrew and Introductory Grammar by Paige H. Kelly, Lesson 14 and Lesson 16. Then if you want to get into the details of weak verbs and verb stems, then do all lessons from Lesson 17 to Lesson 31. And in the Basics of Biblical Hebrew Grammar by Gary D. Practico and Miles V. Van Pelt, Section 3, Introduction to Hebrew Verbs and the Kal Stem. Do exercises 14a and 14b, Kal Perfect Weak Verbs. Then, if you wish to have more practice with the weak verbs and verb stems, then do all of Section 4 lesson exercises. Section 4 is the Intro to Derived Stems. So let's have a look at verbal stems. Slide 160, Lesson 8, Verb Stems Table. Let's look at the Hebrew verb stems and what they do. Here we have the Kal simple active verb and the 6 derived stems: Nephal, Payal, Puel, Hifil, Hafal, Hithpael, or Hitpael. And these are simple active, simple passive, intensive passive, causative active, causative passive, and intensive reflexive. We'll see plenty of examples very shortly about what this actually means. Now notice the dots and dashes here. In the next part of the table, we'll have a look at the word for kill, he killed. And we'll see how these different stems affect it. Remember, the verb stems indicate different types of action. Voice denotes if the verb's subject is acting or acted upon. So let's have a look at this table. So we have the strong verb katal, and we'll look at weak verbs in the second half of Lesson 8. So the verb katal means he killed. He killed. So that's the kal form of it. But we can actually derive a slightly different form of that word using the nephal stem. So what we do is we take that basic 3-letter root and we add a nun and these vowel changes here. So katal, he killed, becomes niktal, he was killed. And if I want to say he slaughtered, I can take the basic katal form here and change the vowels like so to create the pile version, the intensive active version of the verb katal, and it becomes katel instead of katal, katel. He slaughtered. So we can see that in Hebrew, instead of creating a whole brand new word, we can just modify an existing word slightly. and get a whole lot of derived verbs from that. So we have, if we want to say he was slaughtered, instead of intensive active, he slaughtered, we can make it intensive passive by changing the vowels. Instead of kital, it becomes kutal. This is the plural form of the verb, kutal. And if we want to say he caused to kill, we would take the hifl form of the kal stem and change it by putting the hey in front of it, and we'll put a yod just before the final verb letter. So katal becomes hiktel or hiktil. Hiktil. He caused to kill. Hiktil. So this is the hifl version of the verb stem. Cause, and it's a causative active. He caused to kill. Now I can also change it into a hofl version, which is the causative passive. So hiktel becomes haktal. He caused to be killed. Haktal. And if I want to say he killed himself or committed suicide, and instead of creating a whole new word called suicide, I just take the existing word, katal, meaning he killed, and I add a hey and a tav to the front of the verb. So katal becomes hith-katal or hit-katal. In this course, I pronounce the tav, both the hard and the soft tav, with a hard sound, t, like in modern Hebrew. But in older biblical Hebrew, it was a th sound or a t sound, depending on whether it had a dot in the ear or not. So this says, depending on your pronunciation, either hith-katal or hit-katal. Hit-katal would be the modern way of saying it, which is the one that I stick to. So here are our 7 stems. The simple active, katal, becomes niktal, kittal, kutal, hiktil, haktal, hitkatal. So again, katal means he killed. Niktal, the nifl version, means he was killed. Kital, the pile version, means he slaughtered. Kutal, the plural version, means he was slaughtered. Hiktil, the hifl version, means he caused to kill. And haktal, the hofl version, he caused to be killed. And finally, the Hitpael version, Hit-katal, he killed himself or committed suicide. So let's have a look at these in more detail. Slide 161, Lesson 8, Verb Stems Summary. Verb stems indicate different types of verbal action and voice. Here is a table that helps to illustrate the 7 verb stems in terms of action and voice. So we've arranged the action along the top here, and along here we have the voice, active, passive and reflexive. So, and in between we have the 7 stems, kal, pile, hifl, nifl, plural, hofl and hithpiel. And nifl appears as both a passive voice and it can also have a reflexive voice. Again, we'll look at all this later. So taking our basic verb, katal, the simple kal verb, we can change it to katal, the file version, hiktil, the hifl version, and the kal version, katal, means he killed, the file version, katal, means he slaughtered, and the hifl version means he caused to kill, hiktil, hiktil. Then we can have a look at the passive voiced stems, nifl, pul, and hofl. And in this example, using the katal, it's niktal, kutal, and haktal, meaning he was killed, niktal, he was slaughtered, kutal, and he caused to be killed, haktal. Finally, we have the reflexive voice, he killed himself, in both nifl and hitbaal, niktal and hitkatal. So anyway, the purpose of this table is simply to arrange these stems in a logical way where we can see the action and voice affecting it. Slide 162, Lesson 8, Verb stems, the kal, simple active. The kal stem is simple action. This is the basic verb stem used in the verb tables in the previous lessons, 1 to 7. So let's have a look at a simple kal stem. Here's the word for he heard, shema. Here's another one. We've looked at this already, katal, meaning he killed. And shamar, he guarded. Shamar, he guarded. The table here shows the kal perfect. For the sake of brevity, we will look at the kal imperfect at the end of the lesson. So this is the kal verb stem. We've already looked at that in lessons 6 and 7. This is the simple active. So we have shema, he guarded, shamra, she guarded, shamat, you guarded to a man. It's actually shamata. Shamat, you guarded to a woman. Shamati, I guarded. Shamru, they guarded. Shamatim, you guarded. Shamatin, you guarded to a woman. Shamanu, we guarded. And we've already seen this, but now we'll have a look at the other 6 stems and compare them. Slide 163, Lesson 8, Verb stems, the nafal, the simple passive or reflexive verb stem. The nafal stem is the simple action with either passive or reflexive voice. So, the nafal stem is the passive or reflexive version of the simple kal verb stem. So if we take the kal verb katal, which means he killed, and we convert it to a nafal by adding the nun, we get niktal, niktal, which means he was killed. So that's the passive voice here. He was killed. Now we can have a look at another example. The word shema, which means he heard. We change it into nafal. It becomes nishma by adding the nun. Nishma, which means either he heard himself or he was heard. So sometimes the nafal can be either reflexive or passive, and just depends on the context of the verse. Both the reflexive and the passive are spelled the same way. So nishma can mean he heard himself, That's a reflexive, or he was heard. So the same spelling for both meanings. Context of verse determines which meaning is the correct one. So the identifying characteristic of the Nafal stem is the nun prefix. We have the nun here with the herrick here. So let's have a look at some examples from Scripture. First example, Medan Nishma Nachrat Susaev. The snorting of his horses was heard, Nishma, from Dan. And literally, from Dan was heard, Medan Nishma Nachrat Susaev. The snorting, Nachrat, of Susaev, his horses. Sus's horse, Susi is my horse, Susaev is his horses. Medan Nishma Nachrat Susaev. From Dan was heard the snorting of his horses. So, this is how we say was. Nishma, was heard, Nishma. That's the 3ms version of the verb. Ki nishbaru lifnei Yahweh. Ki nishbaru lifnei Yahweh. For they were destroyed before the Lord. Nishbaru, destroyed or broken to pieces, smashed to pieces. Ki nishbaru lifnei Yahweh. For they were destroyed, so it's passive voice, denoting past tense, and something that happened to them, not something that they did. So that's the third person common plural, nishbaru. Okay, another example. Here's the word for to hide, sitar, and it's changed to nistara. Nistara. My way is hid from the Lord. You could actually say my way was hid, but it's translated is hid. Nistara is hid from the Lord. Nistara. Derachi, my way. Derek is way. Derachi is my way. Me Yahweh, from the Lord. And that's the third person feminine singular. Nistara. Okay, the last example, and this one is a imperfect, and we'll have a look at the imperfect verb chart at the end of this lesson, this first part of the lesson. That his name, Shemo, may be no more remembered, lo Yizakir od. So that's how we would, this is the Nifl version of the imperfect. The imperfects are a little less easy to recognize straight off. The perfect verb stems are much easier to recognize when they're changed into Nifl. So that's the imperfect 3ms. So that's all for the Nafal stem. Slide 164, Lesson 8, Verb stems, the Nafal, the simple, passive or reflexive verb stem. Let's just have a look at a table and compare the kal with the Nafal just briefly. So the kal is the simple active verb stem, and we have the verb shema, he guarded, in the kal, and that becomes nishmar, he was guarded, and that's the passive nafal meaning. And it can also have a reflexive meaning, he guarded himself. she guarded herself, nishmara. So here we have shamar becomes nishmar. He guarded becomes he was guarded. Shamra, she guarded, becomes nishmara, she was guarded. Shamata, you guarded, becomes nishmata, you were guarded. Shamat, you guarded, to a group of women, to a woman, becomes nishmata, you were guarded. Shamati, I guarded, becomes nishmati, I was guarded. So we can just see that the voice is changed here. So the basic identification clue to a nifal is it has a nun prefix here. And that's all for the nifal comparison table. Slide 165, Lesson 8, Verb stems. Payal, the intensive active verb stem. The payal stem is the intensive form of the simple action of the kal stem. Intensive type action with an active voice. So, the verb, the kal verb katal, he killed, becomes katal, he slaughtered. So it's an intensive or form of the simple action of the kal stem. Another example, shavar, he broke. Shavar, he broke, becomes shabir, he smashed to pieces. Shabir, he smashed to pieces. Notice the vowels are just the same as here. So the basic identifying characteristic of the payal stem, the vowel pattern herik or patach under the first radical, first letter of the verb, and a dagesh forte in the second radical. So we've got an intensification. So instead of a soft sound, shavar, it becomes a hard sound, shabir, which makes sense. It's an intensive, it's a harder thing. It's smashed is a harder, stronger word than broke. So we even have a stronger sound. Shavar becomes shabir. Okay, let's have a look at some examples. Ve'et kol etz hasadei shabir. Ve'et kol etz hasadei shabir. And break, shabir, every tree of the field. Kol etz hasadei. Etz means tree. Hasadei means field. And kol means all or every. And every tree of the field is broken or break. And break every tree of the field. Exodus 9:25. So that's the third MS version. Let's have a look at another example. Ki shalachti aleichem et ha-mitzvah hazot. Ki shalachti aleichem et ha-mitzvah hazot. That, this word here, ki, means either as or like, or in this case they've translated it that. I have sent shalachti, this commandment unto you. Ki shalachti aleichem et ha-mitzvah hazot. So that's the first person common singular. Okay, another example. Bakashti et sha'ahava nafshi. Bakashti et sha'ahava nafshi. I sought him whom my soul loveth. Bakashti, I sought, et sha'ahava, that which loves, nafshi, my soul. Bakashti et sha'ahava nafshi. I sought that which loves my soul. I sought him whom my soul loveth. And that's a first person common singular again. And now a imperfect example. Ki yadabru elecha tavot. Ki yadabru elecha tavot. Though they speak fair words unto thee, speak. Yadabru, fair words to thee. So that's a third person common plural imperfect. So again, notice the patterns here. We have a hirik in the first radical and a dagesh forte, a dot in the second radical, the second letter of the three-letter verb. Okay. Slide 166, Lesson 8, Verb stems, payal, the intensive active verb stem. And now we'll have a look at the tables and compare the payal with the kal. So here is the kal perfect, simple active verb stem, and here is the payal. And it looks pretty much the same except the vowels are different. So the vowel pattern, we have a hirik or patach under the first radical, as opposed to patach here, and a dagesh forte in the second radical, so a hardening or doubling of the sound. Okay, so Shema, he guarded, becomes Shamir, he really guarded. Now, this some of these words may not exist. Again, it's just to show you a pattern. Sometimes people will say that actual word doesn't exist. These tables are just to show how the stems work. But they all could exist, because the Hebrew language is very much like a programming language, and you may come across some of these and you may not. So the main thing here is just to notice an intensification. Because I used the Shema verb in previous examples, I've stuck with it here, but I could have chosen a better example. Perhaps if I had the word shabir, to break, it would have made sense, or to smash to pieces. So break becomes smash to pieces. That would have been a better example, instead of this kind of a little bit goofy, he really guarded, she really guarded. But the point is that the payal intensifies the action. Slide 167, Lesson 8, Verb stems, the pu'ul, the intensive passive verb stem. The pu'ul stem is the passive form of the payal verb stem seen previously. It has intensive action with a passive voice. So, if we take the payal version of the word he killed, katal, becomes katal, which is he slaughtered. And if we change that to a pu'al, it becomes kutal, kutal. He was slaughtered. So it's the passive form of the pa'al verb. So kital becomes kutal. He was slaughtered. Okay, another pa'al. Shabir. He smashed into pieces. Shabir becomes shubar. He was smashed into pieces. Shubar. He was smashed into pieces. So the identifying characteristics of the pu'al stem: a dagesh forte in the second radical, it's just like the pa'al, but it has a different vowel. A kibbutz petach under the first consonant. A kibbutz or petach. Here's the kibbutz with 3 dots, gives it an U sound. Shubar. Okay, let's have a look at some examples. Hayalilu anyot Tarshish ki shudad ma'azkin. Hayalilu anyot Tarshish ki shudad ma'azkin. How Hayalilu, Hayalilu. How, ye ships of Tarshish, anyot, that's ships, that's plural for ships. Tarshish, that's a place near or in Spain. For your strength is laid waste. Ki shudad, laid waste, ma'azchen, your strength. So that's a 3ms version of the verb. Okay, the next example. Hallelu karov gedlo. Praise him according to his excellent greatness. Hallelu. Praise him. Hallelu is praise. Hu is him. Hallelu karov gedlo. For the great greatness or excellent greatness. Good lo. That's a 3rd person common plural. Next example. Ad shuvcha el ha'adama ki mimena lukachta. Till thou return unto the ground. Ad shuvcha, return, until you return. Ad shuvcha el ha'adama, to the adama, the ground. Ki mimena, for from it or from her. Lukachta, you were taken. The word adama is a feminine noun. Okay, so that's a 2nd person masculine singular. Lukachta, wast thou taken. So it's passive. Wast is just was. It's a passive voice and intense action. Okay, and the imperfect example. Yesupar la'adonai l'ador. Yesupar la'adonai l'ador. It shall be accounted to the Lord for a generation. Yesupar. This word yesupar, it shall be accounted, comes from the word sefer, can mean book, or sapir, to number. Yesupar, it shall be counted to the Lord for a generation. La'adoni, to the Lord for a generation. Lador is the word for generation. Lador is for a generation. Yisapar le'Adonai Lador. And that's the third person masculine singular imperfect, Yisupar, of the Puel. Slide 168, Lesson 8, Verb stems, Puel, the intensive passive verb stem. Let's compare the Carl perfect simple active verb stem with the Puel. The basic difference is that we have this kibbutz on the first consonant and a dagesh forte in the second radical, second letter of the verb here. So he guarded, Shema, becomes he was really guarded. So it's intensive passive. And she guarded, Shamra, becomes Shumra, she was really guarded. Shamata, you guarded, becomes Shumata, you were really guarded, to a man, and so on and so forth. So that's the Puel. It's very, very recognizable because of the kibbutz here. Slide 169, Lesson 8, Verb stems, Hifel, the causative active verb stem. The Hifel stem denotes causative action with active voice. So if we take the third person masculine singular word for he killed, katal, and the Kal version, and change it to a Hifel, it becomes hiktil, hiktil. He caused to kill. He caused to kill. Hiktil. So katal, he killed, becomes hiktil. And that's the Hifel version of it. Likewise, another example, Malak, he reigned. Malak, he reigned, or he was king, becomes Himlik. Himlik. He caused to reign, or he made someone king. He caused to reign, or he made someone king. Himlik. So the identifying characteristics of the Hifel stem: a hey with a hirik as a prefix at the front here, and a hirik yod in the stem vowel just here, hirik yod. So let's have a look at some examples. First one, Ki lo himtir Yahweh Elohim el haaretz, for not rained, caused to rain upon the earth like shower, Yahweh Elohim el haaretz, upon the earth. For the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth. Ki lo himtir Yahweh Elohim el haaretz. So himtir means caused it to rain. Himtir. So it's a causative action. Okay, the next example. Kin hidbakti Eloi et kol beit Yisrael. Kin hidbakti. So have I cause to cleave. Hidbakti. Davak means to cleave, and hidvak means to cause to cleave, and hidbakti means I have cause to cleave, or to attach to the house, unto me, the whole house of Israel. To me, Eli, the whole house of Israel. Et kol beit Yisrael. Kol means all. Beit Yisrael, house of Israel. Kin hidbakti. So have I caused to cleave unto me, Eli, et kol Beit Israel, the whole house of Israel. And that is a first person common singular. Hidbakti. Okay, next example. Ata himlakta. Ata himlakta et avdecha. Ata himlakta et avdecha. Thou hast made thy servant king. Ata, thou or you. Ata himlakta, hast made thy servant king, or caused to become king. Himlakta et avdecha, your servant. So malak means king, and himlakta means caused to be made king. So that's a second person masculine singular. Okay, final example, and this one is a imperfect. And we'll have a look at the imperfect table for all these different verb stems later in the lesson. Azkira, I will cause to remember. I will make thy name to be remembered. Shimcha, your name. I will cause, or I will make thy name to be remembered. Azkira, Shimcha, B'kol dor v'dor, in every generation, in all generations. B'kol, in all, dor, generations, v'dor, and generations. Azkira, Shimcha, B'kol dor v'dor. I will make thy name to be remembered in all generations. Again, you can see in the perfect form, it's very easy to recognize because it has a herrick and a hay prefix and a herrick yod in the stem vowel. And in these ones, it doesn't have the stem vowel. Okay, so let's have a look at the table. Slide 170, Lesson 8, Verb stems, Hefel, the causative active verb stem. So let's have a look at the table now in comparison to the Carl Perfect. The Hefel has a hay at the beginning, and sometimes it has a herrick yod in the stem vowel. So that's how we can see if it's a Hefel. So Shema, he guarded, becomes Hishmir, he caused to guard. Shamra, she guarded, becomes Hishmira, she caused to guard. Shemata, you guarded, becomes Hishmata, you caused to guard. So just note sometimes the yod appears there and sometimes it doesn't, but it always has a hay with herrick at the beginning of the Hefel. And don't get this confused with the definite article hay. Just practice. It's just a matter of reading, and you'll soon pick this up. Slide 171, Lesson 8, Verb stems, Hoffel, the causative passive verb stem. The Hoffel stem is the passive form of the Hefel. It means causative action with a passive voice. So if we take the Hefel verb, hiktiel, he caused to kill, and we change it to a Hoffel, it becomes haktal, he caused to be killed. Now that does not look too different. Let's have a look at another example. If we take the Hiffle word himleek, he made someone king, himleek, and we change it to a Hoffle, hamlark, he was made king. So here we have the passive coming in here. He was made king. So the identifying characteristics for the Hoffle stem: it has a hey prefix as in the Hiffle, but it doesn't have the chirik. In this case it has ptach. And the Hiffle and Hoffle are distinguished by their prefix and stem vowels. So they've just got different prefix and stem vowels, but they look the same. So the first example here, he ha'ir hafkad. He ha'ir hafkad. This is the city to be visited. He, literally she, is the city. The word city is a feminine noun. He ha'ir, this, or she, this is the city. Ha'ir hafkad, to be visited. Pakad means to visit. Hafkad, to be visited. So it's a third person masculine singular. Let's go to the next example. Va'ata hashlakta. Va'ata hashlakta mekivrecha kanitsa natav. Va'ata hashlachta mekivrecha kanitsir nitav. But thou art cast out of the grave. Cast out of the grave. Hashlakta. Thou art cast out of the grave. Hashlakta. Va'ata hashlakta mekirbecha. Mekivrecha, sorry. Mekivrecha, from your grave. Kanitzir nitav, as an abominable branch. Nitzir, branch. And that's a second person masculine singular. Okay, another example. Alecha hashlachti merachem. Alecha hashlachti merachem. I was cast, hashlachti, upon thee, alecha, from the womb, merachem. Rachem is the womb. So hashlachti is the first person common singular. Hashlachti, I was cast. So here's the was, here's the passive coming in here. Velo hakalamnu, and we were not hurt. Velo hakalamnu. That's the first person common plural. Hakalamnu, we were not hurt. So the were is a passive. Okay, and an imperfect example. An imperfect example. Okay, Vatushlachi al pnei hasadei begoal nafshech. Vatushlachi al pnei hasadei begoal nafshech. But thou wast cast out in the open field. But thou wast cast out, Vatushlachi, al pnei hasadei, upon the face of the field, begoal nafshech. And we don't have any room to put the rest of the verse there. So, tushlachi, tushlachi. The actual verb here, the root is shalach, to send. Tushlachi, thou wast cast out. Then that's an imperfect second person feminine singular. Okay, let's have a look at the tables. Slide 172, Lesson 8, Verb stems, Hoffel, the causative passive verb stem. And now we'll have a look at the tables and compare the Karl perfect with the Hoffel perfect. Okay, so Shamar, he guarded, becomes Hashmar, he was caused to guard. Again, I'm keeping to this Shamar paradigm verb in all of these, so it may not be the best one for this particular verb stem. But you can see the pattern with the hey, with the ptach underneath it, and not to be confused with the definite article, the. So, Shamar, he guarded, becomes Hashmar, he was caused to guard. Shamra, she guarded, becomes Hashmara, she was caused to guard, and so forth all the way down. So the identifying characteristic is a hey prefix as in the Hiffel, but different stem vowels. And there's no yods appearing in here like in the Hiffel. Slide 173, Lesson 8, Verb stems, Hitpael, the reflexive verb stem. The Hitpael stem is an intensive action with a reflexive voice, or sometimes a passive voice. So it's intensive action with a reflexive voice. So if we take the Karl verb for he killed, katal, and we change that to Hitpael, it becomes Hitkatel. Hitkatel. He killed himself, or committed suicide. Hitkatel. So instead of creating a new word for, a totally new word for committing suicide, we just take the word for killed and we add the hey and the tav there to the front of it, and it changes from he killed to he killed himself, or committed suicide. So that's a Hitpael reflexive. Now let's have a look at another example. Chava, which means he hid. It's when Adam and Eve hid from the Lord. Chava becomes hit chabe. Hit chabe. He hid himself. He hid himself. Again, a reflexive form. So the identifying characteristics of Hitpael stem are a hey with a chirik and a tav and a vocal shiva prefix, producing the hit, very recognizable hit sound in the Hitpael stem, and a dagesh forte in the second root consonant. So here we have the dagesh forte, doubling or hardening the sound of the letter. Alright, let's have a look at some examples. The first example, Ashia hit makir. Ashia hit makir. La asot hara. Ashia hit makir. La asot hara. Which did sell himself. Hit makir. Makir means to sell. It was one of the names of one of the descendants of Manasseh, Makir, which did sell himself to work wickedness. Which Ashia hit Makir sold himself, or sell himself, to work or to do la asot hara, evil or wickedness. So that's a third person masculine singular. Hit Makir, to sell himself. Okay, another example. Va'ani hit chazakti. Va'ani hit chazakti. Ki yad Yahweh Elohai Eloi. Ki yad Yahweh Elohai Eloi. And I was strengthened as the hand of the Lord my God was upon me. Va'ani hit chazakti ki yad Yahweh Elohai alai. And I was strengthened. Hit chazakti. So you could say I was strengthened myself. I became strong. So it's a reflexive thing again. It's something that you're doing to yourself, or something that was happening within yourself. In this case, as the hand of the Lord my God was upon me. So that's a first-person common singular. Hit chazakti. And the word chazak means to be strong. Okay, next example. Va'el ha'am tomah hit kadshu lamacha. Va'el ha'am tomah hit kadshu lamacha. And say thou unto the people, Va'el ha'am, and to the people, tomah, you will say, sanctify yourselves. Hit kadshu lamacha, tomorrow. So kadosh means holy. Hit kadshu means sanctify or make holy, make yourself holy, or make yourselves holy. This is a common plural. So that's the third person common plural. Sanctify yourselves. Hit kadshu. Okay, and a imperfect example. Ki al kul yit gadal. Ki al kul yit gadal. For he shall magnify himself above all. Ki al kul yit gadal. And above all. Al kul, upon all. And that is a third person masculine singular imperfect. So let's have a look at the tables. Slide 174, Lesson 8, Verb stems, hitpaal, the reflexive verb stem. Okay, so let's compare the tables. Here's the Carl Perfect, and here is the hitpaal. And it's very easy to recognize the hitpaal because it has the hey and the tav right in front of the rest of the verb. Very, very simple and straightforward. And it has a dagesh forte and the second root consonant just there. So shamar, he guarded, becomes hit shamir. He guarded himself. Hit shamir. And shamra, she guarded, becomes hit shamra. Hit shamra. She guarded herself. Hit shamra. And you can see the pattern going all the way down there. So that's the hitpaal, the reflexive verb stem. Slide 175, Lesson 8, Verbal root, stems, conjugations. Okay, so I just want to show you very simply these verb stems again. First of all, we have our root in this example, katal, and then we get the kal, simple active verb stem from that, with the patach at the beginning, katal, he killed, and then we get the 6 other derived stems, the nafal, the pile, the puel, the hifel, the hofel, and the hithbaal or hitbaal. So instead of katal, we get niktal, kittal, kutal, hiktil, haktal, hitkatal. He killed himself, and so forth. Won't go through all of those again. So we have 6 stems from the kal stem, so 7 stems in total. And from these, just like in the the cull stem, we also have perfects and imperfects and imperatives, cohortives, jussives, infinitive construct, infinitive absolute, and participle, as we saw these in Lesson 7. Slide 176, Lesson 8, Verb stem tables, perfect of the strong verb. Okay, well, here we have the perfect past tense table of the strong verb, and it doesn't just contain the cull form of the perfect, but it also lists all the other stems: niffle, pile, puel, hiffle, hoffle, hithpael. So you're going to see a lot of these sorts of tables in the back of grammar books, and you're not required to memorize them, but just see the patterns that occur. So if we take the first stem, the cull, here we have it here, the simple active verb stem, the basic verb. And now we'll compare it to the niffle. And the niffle basically just has a nun prefix in front. That's its distinguishing characteristic. And the pile, it is similar to the cull in appearance, except the vowels are different. The vowel pattern chirik or petach under the first radical, in this case a chirik, and a dagesh forte in the second radical. So in this mem here we have the dagesh, making it a hard or double sound. So that's the pile. And the puel, we have a dagesh forte in the second radical, there we go, and a kibbutz petach under the first consonant. So that's very, very identifiable. Those three dots in a line, and a diagonal line, is the kibbutz, the U sound of the puel. Okay, and the hiffle, it has a hey with a chirik in it as a prefix. Here it is here. And it has a chirik yod stem vowel, sometimes, on the 3ms and 3fs, and down here on the third person common plural. And moving on to the hoffle, we have, it's very similar to the hiffle, except the hey prefix, as in the hiffle, is now reduced to a kametz, just there, as opposed to a chirik. And the hiffle and the hoffle are distinguished by their prefix and stem vowels. So just slightly different vowels here, as opposed to here. Okay, and the hithpael, very easy to recognize. It has the hey, tav prefix with the chirik and vocal shiva here. Hit, shamir. And it has a dagesh forte in the second root consonant, just here, the second radical, just here. Shamir, with a dot there, dagesh forte. So, there we go. That's the perfect past tense table of the strong verb for all the different verb stems. And please feel free to print these tables out for handy reference. Slide 177, Lesson 8, Verb Stems Summary. We have looked at examples of the following verb stems: the cull, the niffle, the pile, the puel, the hiffle, the hoffle, the hithpael. These stems provide a very simple and elegant way of creating words. Instead of creating a brand new word, we can modify an existing one. We do this by adding other letters or vowels. So we take the basic cull verb and add new vowels and sometimes extra letters to modify its meaning. thus creating 6 extra verb stems proceeding from the central Kal branch of the menorah stem, and so providing light to the world. So here we have our Kal as a central stem, and then derived from that central stem are the branches, or the verb stems, the 6 other verb stems branching out from the central candlestick just here. Just a nice way of perhaps remembering it and looking at it, that the Kal, which is in the center, from that all these other ones are derived. So we have only seen tables of the perfect verb stems of the strong verb, but there are imperfect ones. We'll also look at weak verbs in the second half of this lesson in part 2. But we're now going to have a look at the imperfect verb stem tables, and we'll see those on the next slide. So the perfect ones, the perfect verb stems, are perhaps nicer and easier to identify, but some of the imperfect verb stems are a little bit more difficult to identify, and some of them are quite straightforward too. So let's have a look at that. Slide 178, Lesson 8, Verb Stem Table, Imperfect of the strong verb. Here we have the 7 stems of the imperfect or future tense of the strong verb. The first stem is the Kal, the simple active verb stem, and following that we have the Nafal, the first derived stem, and the only difference between the two are the actual vowels. You'll notice that we have a under the shin we have a dagesh for a starter, and then underneath the shin we have a kametz followed by a sere under the mem instead of a holom. So the nafal imperfect looks almost identical to the Kal except for different vowels. And we see the same thing again with the payal. We simply have the same consonants but different vowels. A petach and a sere and a dagesh in the second radical. The pu'al, we have a dagesh forte in the second radical, and a very recognizable kibbutz in the first radical under the shin. The hifel, we have a petach before the first radical, just here, under the yod or under the tavs, under the aleph and so forth. And we have a hirik yod stem vowel, just here, hirik yod, all the way through, more or less, except in these two. The hofel, we have a kametz before the first radical, just there. And the hifel and hofel are distinguished by their prefix and stem vowels. So there we go. So all of the imperfects are very similar, if not identical, to the Kal in terms of consonants, but the vowels are different. So quite different to the perfect, which has very recognizable differences. Of course, the Hithpiel, it does have a different consonant. It has the an added tav here, a tav with a vocal shiva there. So instead of Yishmor, we have Yit Shamir. Yit Shamir. So again, the Hithpiel was quite recognizable because of that tav added to it. So that's the imperfect future tense of the strong verb. and it's good to have this table printed out just for reference. You're not required to memorize any of this, but just see the patterns in the vowels and so forth. Slide 179, Lesson 8, Verb Stem Table, Imperative, Infinitive, and Participle. So here are the verb stems, and here is the table for the imperative of the strong verb. And again, we had a look at imperatives in the second part of Lesson 7. And we have the infinitive of the strong verb, the absolute and construct. And we have the participle of the strong verb also, and all the active and passive, and all the various verb stems. So again, this is a table for handy reference, so you may wish to keep this and print it out as you're reading the text. Again, you're not required to memorize any of this, but just see how these various stems affect the vowels and so forth. Well done. It's time to have a cool, refreshing break. You deserve it. Lesson 8 will continue, and we will look at the following topics next. We'll have a look at weak verbs. And what are weak verbs? Well, you'll just have to wait until part 2 to find out. So well done. Have a break. Well, welcome to Lesson 8, Part 2. And in the first part of the lesson, we had a look at verbal stems. And in Part 2, we'll have a look at weak verbs. Now, the topic of verb stems and weak verbs covered in this lesson often fill over half of any Hebrew textbook. In order to begin reading the Hebrew Bible, you should know what these things are, but you don't need to get bogged down in all the details. Just be able to recognize them. So the suggested exercises for Lesson 8 Part 2 in Biblical Hebrew and Introductory Grammar by Paige H. Cowley, we have Lesson 14 and Lesson 16. Then if you want to get into all the details, do all lessons from 17 to 21. And in Basics of Biblical Hebrew Grammar by Gary D. Practico and Miles V. Van Pelt, Section 3, Introduction to Hebrew Verbs and the Qal Stem, 14a and b, the Qal Perfect, weak verbs. Then the rest of the section if you need practice, and Section 4, Intro to Derived Stems. So there's a lot in this lesson about weak verbs, and again, grammar texts go into all the nuts and bolts and all the details of this, but you don't need to get too hung up on it, and I'm just giving the briefest of introductions into weak verbs so that you know that they exist and what they are, as opposed to strong verbs that we've looked at in the rest of the previous lessons. Slide 184, Lesson 8, Strong Verbs, Definition. So why do we need to know about strong and weak verbs? Well, they determine how the vowels appear on the various verb stems. And they also affect the various letters added to conjugate the stem. Now the word conjugate simply refers to whether they are a perfect or imperfect, imperative, participle, jussive, and so on and so forth. So let's see some more definitions. Hebrew verbs, as stated, are either strong or weak. We have looked at strong verbs so far in our Carl perfect and imperfect verb tables in lessons 6 and 7. The Carl perfect, third person masculine singular, is the simplest form of the Hebrew verb. Carl means light, from the word kalal, and it just means simple or light. It designates the simple active stem of the verb. We've seen also that there are 6 derived stems from Carl. We saw that in part 1 of lesson 8. That is Nafal, Pile, Puel, Hiffel, Hoffel, Hitpal, and so forth. Now, not all verbs and their stems are strong verbs. For example, some verbs have 2 consonants, and they're called hollow verbs. And these hollow verbs are weak verbs. A strong verb must have 3 consonants in its Carl perfect third masculine singular form. And there are a number of other constraints that determine whether the verb is a strong verb or a weak verb. So let's look at some more definitions of the strong verb. Slide 185, Lesson 8, Strong Verbs, Definition. So let's continue with our definitions. We've already seen that a strong verb must have 3 consonants in its Carl perfect third masculine singular form, or 3ms. We saw that in the previous slide. But what sort of consonants make a strong verb? A strong verb cannot have any of the following: a middle vowel with a yod or a vav, in which case it's called a hollow verb, because it is really just 2 consonants with a yod or vav in the middle, which becomes a vowel. That is, it's hollow. So a strong verb cannot have a yod or a vav in the middle of it. And a strong verb cannot have a guttural letter, and that's an aleph or a hay or a chet or an ayin, and sometimes a resh. So it can't have any of these, and sometimes this. And a strong verb cannot begin with a yod or a vav or a nun. So if it has a yod, a vav, or a nun in the at the beginning of the verb, then it's not a strong verb. If its second and third consonants are identical, so if the last 2 consonants are the same, then it's not a strong verb. So all these exceptions here for what a strong verb can't be are called weak verbs. So anything with any of these characteristics here is a weak verb, and anything that doesn't have these characteristics is by default a strong verb. Slide 186, Lesson 8, Strong Verbs Examples. So let's have a look at some examples of the strong verb, remembering that they cannot have any of the following weak letter characteristics. They can't have a middle vowel with a yod or a vav. They can't have a guttural letter. They can have a resh in most cases, but sometimes they can't. That's just an exception, just once in a while. They can't begin with a yod or vav or a nun, and they can't have the second and third consonants identical. So let's have a look at some strong verb examples. Karat, it does have the resh, and the resh is usually part of if the verb contains a resh, in most cases it's a strong verb, but there is just a couple of exceptions when it isn't. So karat, he cut. Kashal, he stumbled. Katav, he wrote. Mashal, he ruled. Notice they're kind of strong words. When you have these letters in here, it tends to be a weaker sound. Pakad, he visited. Katal, he killed. Shakav or Shachav, he lay down. Shamar, he kept. So these are all strong verbs, and they don't have any of these characteristics here. Slide 187, Lesson 8, Weak verbs, examples. So we've already had a look at some strong verbs. Let's have a look in contrast to weak verbs. So, a verb is weak if its middle vowel has a yod or a vav, in which case it's called a hollow verb, because it is really just two consonants with a yod or a vav in the middle, which becomes a vowel. So effectively it's hollow. It's got nothing in the middle. So these are hollow verbs, or which are weak verbs. Bo, to go. Mut, to die. Kum, to arise. Rum, to be high or exalted. Seem, to put or place. Shuv, to return or turn. So they all have a yod or a vav in the middle of them, acting as a vowel. Here it's a herek yod, giving it an E sound, and here it's a shurek, a vav with a dot in it, giving it an U sound. So effectively it doesn't really have a middle consonant, it's more of a vowel, hence it's hollow. Alright, another type of weak verb. It is a weak verb if there is a guttural letter, an aleph, a hay, a chet, an ayin, and very rarely sometimes a resh also. So let's have a look at some weak verbs according to this definition. Here we have the word for he heard, shamar, and it has an ayin. That's a guttural letter. So this is a weak verb. Matzah, he found. Matzah has an aleph, which again is a guttural letter. So it's a weak verb. Matzah, he found. Allah, well this has got two guttural letters, one at the beginning and one at the end, an ayin and a hay. Allah, he ascended. Pachad, he trembled or feared. Pachad, he trembled or feared. Ratzah, he pierced. Ratzah, he pierced. It's got an ayin. By the way, pachad has a chet just there. Ratzach, he murdered. Ratzach. Shabach. Shabach, again it has a chet. He extolled or calmed. Achal has an aleph here. And Zachak, it has a chet. He laughed. Slide 188. Lesson 8. Weak verbs, examples, continued. So let's have a look at some more examples. It is a weak verb if it begins with a yod, a vav, or a nun. So here's some examples. The first three begin with a yod. Yitzak, to pour. Yitzar, to form. Yasad, to establish. And the last three begin with a nun. Nafal, to fall. Nagash, to come near. Natan, to give. And we have the word vav. And it begins, of course, with a vav, and vav means to attach, and it's the word used to mean clip, the little clasps that attached the curtains were called vavs, and the letter vav is used to attach two different parts of a sentence together. You put a vav between the words at the front of a word, and it means and the word and attaches two different things. In any case, the verb or vav, to attach, is a weak verb. Okay, some more examples. It is a weak verb if its second and third consonants are identical. For example, chakak, to cut or engrave, has two kufs at the end. Tamam, to be completed, has two mems at the end. Shadad, to destroy, has two dalats at the end. Shavav, to return, has two bets at the end. Katzats, to cut off, has two tzadis at the end, a tzadi and a final tzadi. Salal, to heap up, has two lameds. So all of these are weak verbs too, because their second and third consonants are identical. So this wraps it up for the examples of weak verbs. Slide 189, Lesson 8, Weak Verbs Table. The following table shows 10 different classifications of weak verbs, and the columns are called column 1, 2 and 3 for first, second and third letters of the verb, or another word for that is radicals, first, second and third radical. An older way of classifying the first, second and third position in the verb has a letter standing for each position from the verb pa'al. So a letter in position 1 is either called a position 1 letter or a position pay letter. A letter in the second position is called a second position letter or a ayin, and third position is also called a lamed position. In any case, let's have a look at this example. The first one has a guttural in the first position, so it's called, according to this nomenclature, it's called a pay guttural. In the more modern system, it's called a one guttural. So in any case, an ayin is a guttural. So this is an example, a mud, of a weak verb, and there is a table associated with this classification, and the weak verbs will take on vowels and consonants in an identical way if it's got a guttural in this location, an ayin or a hay or a chet and so forth. That's called a pay guttural. And a couple of slides from now we'll look at a whole lot of different tables for each one of these classifications. So this one here, sha'al, it has an aleph in the second location, the ayin location. So it's called an ayin guttural, or in the more modern system it's called a two guttural or second guttural. So sha'al, it's got a guttural in the second position. So the first one has a guttural here, the second one has a guttural here, and the third one has a guttural here, a chet, in the word shalach in this example. So, as I said, we'll see tables for verbs that have this particular pattern. Further down we have the word achal, and it has a aleph in the first position here. So it's called a pay aleph weak verb, and there's a chart associated with that, or a first aleph verb, and so on and so forth through this list. Here we see the hollow verbs, the ayin vav and the ayin yod, and that can be a second vav or second yod weak verb. And here we have a verb beginning with a yod. Again, that's a weak verb. It begins with a yod. So it's called a pay vav or pay yod. The pay meaning it's in the first position here. And this one here has two identical letters in the second and third position. So that's called a double ayin verb or geminate verb. And we have these ones here: pay aleph, lamed aleph, and lamed hay. So there's a table for each one of these. So this is just a useful classification, and each table associated with these will show all the different vowel changes for any of the verbs in this classification. Slide 190, Lesson 8, Verb Tables. You've seen the strong verb table for the perfect and imperfect in Lesson 7. Grammar books usually have lots and lots of tables of weak verbs also, and you saw the classification chart in the previous slide with the 10 different classifications of weak verbs, and we'll see that in the following slides, the actual charts. Here's an example of a chart, this one from Page H. Kelly's book. This is the pay guttural verb, and you'll see how the vowels work and consonants work in the various conjugations and verb stems. It's not necessary to know all that to read Biblical Hebrew. It's enough to know that these weak verbs exist and that they have different vowels in their conjugations and stems. And it's enough to know that there is a table that you can look up if you want to check up what it is. I've hardly used these tables at all. It's more of an academic exercise. I would really recommend you just learn the Hebrew words and begin reading the Bible very slowly and carefully. It's not the purpose of this course to go into all the details of weak verbs. But if you want, you can purchase a Hebrew textbook and do the numerous weak verb exercises within it. Again, most biblical Hebrew grammar textbooks will spend, anywhere between 1/3 to 2/3 of the book on weak verbs, but weak verbs only account for 1/3 of the verbs in the Bible. So it's an exercise in diminishing returns. It is important, but it's not nearly as important as the other lessons in the previous to this. So the following pages give an example of Hebrew verb charts for the weak verbs. So that slides 191 to 220. So we've got about 30 slides there, and I'll just rush through them very, very quickly just to flash them on the screen, and you can look at them at your leisure if you so desire. They are there for reference only and not to give you a headache. And again, this chart here was from Page H. Kelly's Biblical Hebrew and Introductory Grammar. So let's have a look at them. Slides 191 to 220, weak verbs. In this slide, slide 191, we have the pay guttural of the perfect. So this is the table for the pay, or the first guttural, the perfect, and you can see all the different stems here and the vowel changes and so forth. So this is just for your reference. Again, if you would like to refer back to the table that we had back on slide 189, you can see all these tables, all these classifications here, and there's usually 2 or 3 tables for each one of these, a perfect and an imperfect, and then the imperatives and jussives and so on and so forth. So we've just had a look at the pay guttural, the perfect form, and we'll have a look at the imperfect after that. So here's the perfect, and we'll just skip on to the next page, page 192, and this is the pay guttural imperfect. And then the pay guttural imperative, participle, and infinitive, and so forth. So I'm not going to spend much time on these. I'll go to the next classification, an ayin, or second guttural perfect. And the imperfect, the ayin guttural imperfect on slide 195. And the ayin guttural imperative and participle on slide 196. And the next classification, a lamed 3 guttural perfect on slide 197. And the imperfect of the lamed guttural, or the third guttural, and that's on slide 198. And the lamed 3 or 3 guttural, or third guttural, imperative, infinitive, and participle, etc. And let's go on to the next classification, the pay aleph on slide 200, the perfect, imperfect, and imperatives. And the lamed aleph perfect on slide 201. Slide 202, the lamed 3 aleph imperfect. And on slide 203, the lamed 3 aleph imperative, infinitive, and participle, etc. Again, I haven't used these too much, in all honesty. I'm not that bored, but it is necessary to know this in a bit more detail when you're actually learning to speak the language or write the language. But for passively reading it, you don't need to know all the ins and outs of the vowel changes. You just need to roughly recognize nifl, pile, and pil, and hoffel, and hitbael. And if you've got the kal, perfect and imperfect of the strong verb, that will do you well for everything else. And you should be able to notice, oh, that's a that's a weak verb. It's got an aleph in it, or it's got an ayin in it, or a chet, or it's got a yod at the beginning, or a nun at the beginning, and that's going to make some differences in the vowels. So let's continue on slide 204, the lamed, or the third hay, the lamed hay, perfect, and the lamed hay imperfect on slide 205. And the lamed hay volatives, participles, infinitives, and so forth on slide 206. The pay nun perfect, first nun perfect, on slide 207, the pay non-imperfect on slide 208, and the pay non-imperative participle infinitive and so forth on slide 209. And the Ayin Vav, or the Ayin Yod hollow Vav, perfect, and on slide 210. On slide 211, the Ayin Vav or Ayin Yod imperfect, and on slide 212, the Ayin Vav or Ayin Yod volatives, etc., imperative and participle and so forth. On slide 213, the Pei Vav perfect. On slide 214, the Pei Vav imperfect. On slide 215, the Pei Vav imperative, participle, infinitive, etc. On slide 216, the Geminate perfect. Again, you can have a look at the printouts on your PDF version of this lesson to look at these in detail. The Geminate imperfect on slide 217. The Geminate imperative, participle, infinitive on slide 218. And the Pei Yod perfect and imperfect on slide 219. And finally, on slide 220, the Pei Yod volatives, participle, infinitive, etc. And that's it for the tables for the weak verbs. And if you like, you can go to do the exercises in some of these textbooks to gain more familiarity with them. Again, here is the list of the 10 classifications that all those 30 odd charts or slides connect to. The Pei guttural, the Ayin guttural, the Lamed guttural, the Pei Aleph, the Lamed Aleph, the Lamed Hey, the Pei Nun, the Ayin Vav, and the Ayin Yod, the Pei Vav and Pei Yod, and the double Ayin. So that's it for the weak verb tables. Okay, well that's lesson 8 completed. Well done. So we've had a look at verbal stems in part 1, and in part 2 we've had a look at weak verbs. So don't be too bogged down with all the weak verb stuff. It's just there for your information, and those tables should be helpful should you need to refer to them. And again, the suggested exercises in Biblical Hebrew and Introductory Grammar by Paige H. Kelly, Lesson 14 and Lesson 16 questions. And then if you want to get into all the details, do all lessons from Lesson 17 to 21. And in Basics of Biblical Hebrew Grammar by Gary D. Practico and Miles V. Van Pelt, Section 3 and Introduction to Hebrew Verbs and the Kaal Stem, then lessons 14a and b, the Kaal Perfect weak verbs, then the rest of the section if you need practice, and Section 4, Intro to Derived Stems. Again, there's a lot of exercises in both these books on the weak verbs and verb stems if you want to get into all the details. So that's it. Well done. You've completed the course. And if you want to go over the course again and refresh your mind on anything, then that's great. but the main thing is just to learn the vocabulary and start getting into the Bible in Hebrew. Again, well done. You should have completed all 8 of these exercises if you've gone through the course, and don't feel at all bad if you want to go through different parts and review it. Certainly print them out if you can and have them handy for reference. The main thing is just to learn verbs, learn the vocabulary, and start reading, and just have those helpful perfect and imperfect verb sheets and the pronominal suffix and whatever else that you need handy, and then just get into the Bible and start reading it very slowly and painstakingly, and hopefully you'll gain some spiritual fruit from the word of Yahweh. Well done. Hopefully you've just completed all 8 lessons. And if you need to go back and revise anything, don't feel bad about that. That's entirely normal. But in any case, if you've covered this material thoroughly, then this should give you a good grounding for just getting into the Word of God, the Bible, in Hebrew. So if you need to do exercises in some of the books, then please purchase those books. That's something that I would thoroughly recommend. In any case, well done, and I just pray that Yahweh helps you to get into His Word by the grace of God. Okay, let's have a look at some of the books that you can buy. Some biblical Hebrew grammars, a dictionary, and a couple of interlinear Bibles. And we'll also have a look at some useful websites. Well, first off is the Biblical Hebrew An Introductory Grammar textbook by Paige H. Kelly. And this is quite attractively laid out, and it's a little bit technical, but it has very good questions at the end of each lesson, and a vocabulary to learn in each lesson. And in order to get the answers, you need to read the handbook that comes with it, a handbook to Biblical Hebrew, and that'll have all the answers. And it's very, very helpful to do these questions because they really help you to start to read Biblical Hebrew and learn words as you go along. So you'll need both books, the exercise book, the textbook, and the answers in the handbook. We also have the Basics of Biblical Hebrew Grammar textbook by Gary D. Practico and Miles B. Van Pelt, and this comes with a CD. And there's also a workbook that you can buy separately that has the questions in it, and the answers to the questions are in the CD. So you can get that at Amazon.com and other places. So the interactive CD in the Basics of Biblical Hebrew Grammar book that we just looked at before has the answers to the questions in the workbook that we'll see next. The workbook has all the questions. The grammar has all the the grammar text. Now there's also a Flashworks program. This is a cue card type program. It has the Hebrew word up here, and then you push a button and it'll say it, and push a button and the word in English will appear under it just like the cue card software. And there's other bits and pieces with that as well. So you'll need to get both the grammar textbook and also the workbook. The workbook has the exercises, but the grammar book has the grammar and the CD with the answers. Okay, you can get that from Amazon.com also. And a Hebrew dictionary is very, very helpful, and I would recommend this one, an Etymological Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew by Mattiyahu Clark, based on the commentaries of Samson Raphael Hirsch. If you can get it, that's I would recommend it. Of course, you'll have to be pretty familiar with the Hebrew alphabet, so you can look up the Hebrew words alphabetically according to the Hebrew alphabet. And it is very useful for outlining all the different types of uses of the same verb in Hebrew and whereabouts that occurs in the Bible. And we have an interlinear Bible, 5 volumes in this Schottenstein Interlinear Chumash from Genesis to Deuteronomy, and they have the words in Hebrew and with the English words underneath each word, so that's very, very useful, and it has translations and various commentaries there also. And this is a little bit of a close-up of what it looks like, so that again, that's very useful. And there is a much smaller Bible with Hebrew on one side and English on the other. It's not interlinear, doesn't have the words under each, that doesn't have the English words under each Hebrew word, but it has the English on the other page. So it's virtually the same commentary and everything as the Schottenstein Interlinear Chumash that we saw before. But again, it has the English on the other side of the page, not under each word. Okay, and of course these commentaries are made by Jewish rabbis that don't believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, and so there'll be some commentary there that'll be helpful, and others that may not be quite so helpful. In any case, it's a useful book. Now we have some websites if you want to learn Hebrew. There's the HebrewForChristians.net website, and there's some useful links there, and the BibleWheel.com website that has some interesting observations on the wonderful way the Lord has created the Bible over many centuries with many different writers, and how it all has amazing patterns in the Hebrew. And for learning modern Hebrew, you can get the FSI Hebrew course at fsi-language-courses.org, and just search for the Hebrew one there. And you can purchase the Rosetta Stone software if you've got a bit of brass in your pocket, a bit of money, then you can spend it on the Rosetta Stone. It's quite an interesting program. Websites, Messianic websites. There's the Two House News Network, tnnonline.net. It's all about the lost tribes and two houses, House of Israel and House of Judah. And we have El Shaddai Ministries.us by Pastor Mark Biltz, and he has some wonderful resources there, and he's produced a wonderful set of DVDs on the feasts. And we have the HebrewRoots.com website, and there's plenty of links there, so it won't take long before you find all sorts of stuff on the internet. And there's also free software to help you with your Hebrew. You can go to the websites for free for the free and up-to-date versions of the software. There's the alphabet quiz that we've seen already by Robert C. Graff that helps you to learn the letters, and that works with Windows XP and Vista. I'm not sure if it works with Windows 7. And we have the Cue Cards program, and we have another program called Flashcards that helps you to learn the Hebrew words with multiple choice questions. It's really quite good, and you'll need to have the Java software installed, but you can get all that free at crosswire.org website. And of course the Faithful Bible programs, Devar 3, ISA, Interlinear Scripture Analyzer, and eSword. So that's it for the websites and books. So I hope that gives you some ideas of some useful things to help you learn this language. Okay, so what's next now that you've finished this particular course? Well, you've got to practice reading the Bible in Hebrew and have the following printed tables handy: the pronominal suffix, the Qal perfect, the Qal imperfect, and a simple verb chart of verb stems and their meanings. And sing some Hebrew songs and get familiar with them with the Hebrew letters or the Hebrew alphabet, not written in English with transliterations. And keep Yahweh's commandments and the testimony of Yeshua. Be prayerful and humble. Dig a garden and be ready to move when the Lord calls, because Yahweh is going to bring the lost tribes out of America, Australia, New Zealand, wherever they're scattered, and bring them back to Israel. So it's time to come out of Babylon, to follow Yeshua, study and keep His word, learn Hebrew and Torah, dig a garden, and share. You know, I don't care what the economy is doing, or natural disasters, pestilence, terrorism, the New World Order, World War III, famine, or even aliens. We shouldn't be worried about anything, but let us just do what our Father commands. You know, I'm putting this course together as we move into some very, very, very strange and terrible days, but we will see the hand of the Lord if we stick close to Him and take Yeshua seriously and begin to take His commandments very seriously and walk by His Spirit and listen to His voice. This is the way, walk ye in it. Well, let me leave you with this Aaronic blessing recorded in Numbers chapter 6 verses 24 to 26. And the sons of Aaron, the priests, were to bless Israel at certain times with this blessing. Yevarechecha Yahweh v'yishmerecha. Ye'ir Yahweh paneav elecha v'yechunecha. Yisa Yahweh paneav elecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh light His faces to you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh lift His faces of Him to you and put to you peace. So this strange word usually translated face or His face or His countenance is actually literally His faces. And you'll remember the four cherubim, and they were all looking at the one on the throne, just as the four Gospels are looking to Yeshua. The face of Yahweh is Yeshua. Yeshua says, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." So the face of Yahweh, or the faces of Him, are seen in His Son, the firstborn, Yeshua HaMashiach, the Aleph and the Tav. So may Yeshua bless you and keep you, and make His face to shine upon you.
And he showed me a river of water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of Elohim and of the Lamb. In the middle of its street, and on either side of the river, was a tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And no longer shall there be any curse, and the throne of Elohim and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. And they shall see his face, and his name shall be upon their foreheads. And night shall be no more, and they shall have no need of a lamp or the light of the sun, because Yahweh Elohim shall give them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. And he said to me, "These words are trustworthy and true." And Yahweh Elohim of the set-apart prophets has sent his messenger to show his servants what has to take place with speed. See, I am coming speedily. Blessed is he who guards the words of the prophecy of this book. And I, Yochanan, saw and heard these matters. And when I heard and saw, I fell down to worship before the feet of the messenger who showed me these matters. And he said to me, "See, do not, for I am your fellow servant, and of your brothers the prophets, and of those who are guarding the words of this book. Worship Elohim." And he said to me, "Do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book, because the time is near. He who does wrong, let him do more wrong. He who is filthy, let him be more filthy. He who is righteous, let him be more righteous. He who is set apart, let him be more set apart. And see, I am coming speedily, and my reward is with me, to give to each according to his work. I am the Aleph and the Tav, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Blessed are those doing his commands, so that the authority shall be theirs unto the tree of life, and to enter through the gates into the city. But outside are the dogs, and those who enchant with drugs, and those who whore, and the murderers, and the idolaters, and all who love and do falsehood. I, Yeshua, have sent my messenger to witness to you these matters in the assemblies. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star. And the Spirit and the bride say, "Come." And he who hears, let him say, "Come." And he who thirsts, come. And he who desires it, take the water of life without paying. For I witness to everyone hearing the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to them, Elohim shall add to him the plagues that are written in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, Elohim shall take away his part from the book of life, and out of the set-apart city, which are written in this book. He that bears witness to these matters says, "Ye, I am coming speedily." Amen. Ye, come, Master Yeshua. The favor of our Master Yeshua Messiah be with the set-apart ones. Amen.